Hey, everybody, and welcome back to our new eighth episode of the Design System Field Guide. As usual, and to my pleasure, I'm going to be hosting with Chris and Catherine. Hey, guys, how are you doing?
Good. I'm just getting over a cold, so I might cough periodically, which is kind of annoying. But I had a great New Year, great Christmas. My family celebrates Christmas. It was really fun. How about you all? Did you have a good time?
Yeah, it was great holidays, lots of family time, both here in the Bay Area and Seattle. And also my beloved Michigan Wolverines. I'm a huge college football fan, just won the national championship yesterday or on Monday. So that was a big post New Year's Christmas present for me. So
Yeah, we have two Michigan fans at Knapsack that were just insufferable all day long.
oh yeah,
Nice.
we're gonna be insufferable for a while, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, well, for me, I had a nice long break with my family. We stayed local. And so, yeah, it was nice. Plus, here I'm in Colorado, so it means usually white Christmas, which is always a plus. So, yeah, it was very nice. Anyway, we have a very special guest today. Hi, Kevin. How are you doing?
Really good, really good. 2024 is going to be the year. I know it.
Okay. Well, it's funny. I have also a good vibe about 2024, so I guess we'll see if we're right on this or what. Chris, do you want to do the introduction?
Yeah. Hey, Kevin. So Kevin and I have known each other for a few months now. We've talked a lot about patterns, about the news and media business, about all things design systems. And we've had some great chats. We recently did a podcast recording that'll be published next month. And just really excited to welcome you to the program to talk about one of our preeminent evergreen topics about how hard it is to actually name something.
I appreciate it, and thank you so much. And I love getting together with you, Chris, and talking. It's really deep stuff that I think we should be talking about. It's a really big field. We don't perhaps appreciate just how many disciplines we're really touching upon in design systems.
Yeah, cool. Great. Well, before we go to like the meteor stuff, we usually go over, interesting thing that happened between, the last episode and this one. So let's go over like in the like little like nuggets of, interesting stuff that we found. Well, I think it was yesterday that I heard about this effort from Jan Thoman. So he created this playlist about all the design system podcasts. I created a tiny URL for people to be able to find it more easily, but I think it's pretty cool. There's obviously a lot of content. So I don't know if you're a
Hours
big
and
Yeah.
hours of content.
Yeah, if you want to go like for I don't know, like a 2-week marathon
Cross country road trip.
Yeah. Exactly. Twice maybe. But
Is the field guide in there? I actually didn't check.
I don't think so, because it's podcast.
Video,
so there is your design system podcast, but I don't think I think we're in other places like videos, but this is purely audio, I'm guessing. Anyway, so this is pretty cool. Let's move on to the next thing that happened recently. Sorry, I have just so many things.
Wow, 2017, there was a podcast about design system. That blows my mind.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, who wants to talk about this?
Well, so Brad and I have actually had a couple of conversations about what is necessary for a global design system. We've talked about OpenUI and a bunch of the other projects that are out there right now that are kind of taking something like Google Material or IBM Carbon, many of which are already open source, and trying to think about like, what does a design system look like that wasn't ever built for a company, but was built just to be the foundational design system that we all use. And so, knowing Brad, he would love to talk about the date picker because that's his favorite component to hate on. where he always thinks about like, why in the world are we rebuilding date pickers? They're really complicated. They're a pain in the butt. And once you've built one, you've sort of built all of them. And so having some place where we could go to basically say like, this is the definitive date picker across a global design system is really interesting. And it's kind of fascinating because this also intersects with a lot of what's happened in React and web components and HTML standards. The idea of a button has been a curious evolution through web standards over the past decade, where we finally have the ability to specify something like a button in code as a button without having to do a bunch of work to make that happen. And I think that what is interesting here is there's this sort of race that's taking place between the idea of where is it that we all go to get our basic bits. And one of those things could be some sort of global open source design system. Another could be an advancement in the way that we think about the coding languages we use for the web. I personally feel like HTML and CSS has not gone far enough in terms of helping us define componentry. Hence why we rely on JavaScript for everything. But the idea of where do we go for our basic bits is a fascinating question. And I agree with Brad, having something that represents a global repository of those basic things, it would be a huge benefit to humanity. Specifically those of us in design. I believe, yeah, and make better use of our collective human potential. Brad said it more eloquently than I just did.
Yeah, okay. I'm also, I mean, I'm going to play the devil's advocate here, but it feels to me that it might be, like those articles on Wikipedia where there's like so many people potentially, like putting their fingers on it and say, oh, yeah, but, like it should be like this, it should be like that, and have like 12 revision a day on, like certain things, because sometimes people have like strong opinions about, like.
Nah, that'll never happen.
Yeah.
Like, you remember the W3C working group and the design token spec? There were no opinions.
Totally
there.
functional.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I love the idea. I'm just, I'm wondering how this might play out. But yeah. Kevin, do you have any opinion on this initiative?
I have all the opinions on this initiative, and it seems like and even Brad Frost mentioned this because he had mentioned this for a few years, I imagine, and there has been a lot of people who have been thinking about a global design system over quite a bit of time, and me too, and I believe I'm sort of I am approaching that from a different perspective than, let's say, Brad Frost is, but I don't know because me and Brad are not buds and we're not sharing a lot or anything. So I'm extraordinarily curious about how he's thinking about approaching this. Another thing is that Into Design Systems, for instance, they're going to do a conference, and one of the topics is going to be how to name design tokens. And I've been like, so I have to know, what are you thinking? What, because they're asking the community, what do you want to know? And I really want to know what they were thinking about what they were going to share. Long and short, I think really that is our great divide is our opinions on what to name things, how to name things. And if we can align, then we could have the global design system, which is a dream of mine.
Yeah, it's interesting too to have your opinion on this because you use an open source design system.
Yes.
And that the work you do is based in NewsKit. And so, you're one of those companies that could be mentioned in the same breath as Google and IBM that have created an open source system that other people could adopt. And so when you think about that, I'm kind of curious, like, look, News had an economic incentive to create that because you are, a global company, global brands, lots of different properties all over the world. there's a challenging idea of economics between around a global design system, but then we also have things like HTML, and so the idea of standards and design systems automatically creeps into this conversation. And when you think about that, like especially using NewsKit, how do you view even your own design system in this context?
It's a great question, and I think I've been blessed, or I think Dow Jones, for instance, which is, we were owned by a News Corp, and News Corp was had NewsKit. NewsKit is no longer, in case anyone was wondering. That was last year, which was very sad. Really great luminaries, speakers. That I'm sure you know. So anyway, because I didn't create that design system, but rather inherited it and had to advocate and integrate that system, which was built about 5 years ago, which was like, in dog years, so many years ago. A lot of my research has been, it's like, why does NewsKit work and then not work? So I've had this very particular perspective, is that I don't have an ownership perspective of that. I feel free to actually research and find out what are the core issues here that makes me not really think NewsKit is the perfect solution yet, and we can actually make that better. I hope that answered the question.
Cool.
Oh, Chris, you're muted.
I said, yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Hey, it wouldn't be this stream if I didn't start talking on mute at least once.
I think so. I just wanted to chime in quickly on this one. I think there's something to be said about how a global design system as a foundation is a useful idea for the design systems community to rally around. But I think the challenge, and this is the case with all standards, including the web standards that we see in other spaces outside of just the componentry that HTML and CSS provide out of the box as a browser. There's going to be lots of different forces on what is the standard that should be used, and what is the specific implementation of, let's say, a date picker that is the thing that we rally around. I think, for instance, one of the challenges that I see with having something like this is we have a lot of players already providing some of this foundations in the open source system, in the open source space. And if we brought that to the browser globally, there is like an opportunity to take some chunk of the value and functionality that those open source products provide. But I don't think you're ever going to have a global design system that takes over the whole stack of value that a design system today in an individual company provides. Having a foundation that you can then build upon is helpful, but I do think there's always going to be a need for other layers of abstraction on top of that core foundation that design systems community is going to then focus their work and time on. There's going to be other layers of open source projects that provide additional functionality or specific sort of lenses over the foundations that have to be very general and very broad, but can't provide for the specific sort of e-commerce, for instance, use cases, or like internal tools specific use cases that will need to be brought in the design system for different companies that are working in different spaces. And so thinking about a global design system and not thinking of the whole design system ecosystem getting captured in this one idea is useful for people that read this article and are thinking about how does this affect them and their work. And also, how does the design systems community and ecosystem change if we had something like this in place? So just something to think about.
Our own ambition could fail us here, where like all of a sudden the upstream dependency on some global design system creates a lot of challenges for people. Or the global design system is out of date with it moves necessarily slower because it becomes a standard, right? And so right now, innovation in design systems is so rapid. I mean, the stuff we talk about at Knapsack is completely different than what we talked about 2 years ago. And so to really have something that withstands the test of time, it needs to be extensible, and it needs to probably be fairly limited in scope.
Basically just a date picker, but a global
Yeah,
one.
that's all. I mean, that's
Yeah.
really, I think that if we had that, Brad would be happy. Like the number of times that he's been like date pickers, man.
If we only had the date picker, all of our problems would be solved.
Well, there's
Yeah,
like
the
three
article
hard
should have
problems
been-
on the internet, right? Like
Right.
DNS, dates, and names.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Moving on for the sake of time, but all the cool stuff that happened recently. Well, Fluent 2 has been released by Microsoft. And I think, Chris, you wanted to mention especially the fact that apparently it's particularly geared toward AI capabilities.
Yeah, I think that that's the neatest thing about this is I haven't seen a design system that has been specifically built to power an AI before. There have been some that I've seen that have had AI elements to them, but this is intended to be the design system for Copilot. And Copilot is obviously making a huge push into the Microsoft ecosystem. Microsoft just announced a new key on a keyboard for the first time in like over a decade. It's now built into the Windows OS, so you have native AI capability in your OS. I think if you have Windows 11, the newest update or something. But anyway, the idea of this design system is largely about how does it empower this AI enabled future. And I thought that was kind of neat because I hadn't seen that before.
It is pretty neat. Cool. I didn't know about
Plus,
it.
it's a great team that works on this. I've talked to them a couple of times. They're awesome folks.
Nice. Cool. Well, yeah, definitely check it out. In the same vein, we also have Spectrum 2 that was recently released. So obviously Adobe design system. So yeah, I would encourage other people to check it out. Anything specific about this one that you saw?
I think it's a giant evolution for Adobe that is also to some degree about enabling AI, but it's also Spectrum was one of the first design systems I ever really took a deep dive into. And so seeing a big evolution of it, a lot of the ideas, a lot of the Medium posts, a lot of the early stuff about Spectrum shaped a lot of my ideas about design systems. And so it's anytime that somebody that you look at as inspiration releases a new thing, it's cool to see it.
Yeah. Isn't it also, I think I saw that it was really like from the ground up thought about being accessible. And I know that,
Yes.
you know, like React Aria is like another big project from Adobe, but yeah, I think I saw that and I thought it was pretty cool. Oh yeah, next one is more of a downer, but let's talk about InVision a little bit. And so recently it's been announced, I want to say kind of like out of the, like, at least for me, kind of like out of the blue, like, oh yeah, InVision. What, you know, like what happened? You know, like they kind of like fell out of my radar at some point and they were like, okay, we're shutting down. And so that is kind of like the end of an era, I think, for a lot of people. And so, yeah, I was kind of like reminded that this even existed, but also like, wow, what happened? Anybody wants to share anything on this?
I feel like I'm talking a lot today, but this one's near and dear to me. I have a lot of folks that are ex-Envisioners that work at Knapsack. When we were an agency, before we were a product company, worked very closely with InVision on their DSM product. I spent a lot of time with those people, and I mean, I don't know, it's a funny feeling that I get when I think about it, right? Like there is so much that InVision did for the world, especially in getting people to care about design in a way that I don't think that many businesses had cared about design previously. That I think that it has a memorable mark on our industry. And it's hard to see a company full of so many great people that had such a meteoric rise go from that height 3 years ago to now shutting down. And there's a lot of lessons there and a lot of challenges there. And I encourage you, if you get a chance, to read Clark's post about it on X. It was a really interesting, kind of outside picture that tied a lot of threads together about it. But part of the company is going to continue to exist as Miro. But seeing this news definitely, there was a moment that was pretty sad. There was another post I saw about this on LinkedIn that I thought was interesting. That was like, thanking Envision for creating a community. The community that created, the friends that we made along the way, the connections that Envision fostered through the design leadership forums, through events, through connecting designers in a way that had never been done before. I think that's still really special, and it persists now. So yeah, it's sad, I think, is probably how I feel about it, because it was such an incredible company that got so many people excited about this industry.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Definitely.
I mean, yeah. So I'm sure it's going to be studied for the years to come. But yeah, it's an interesting chapter that's closing for sure. Okay. Well, because you've been talking so much, Chris, we're going to continue. And I know you have a couple of events to announce, so I will leave you the mic for that.
Maybe it's because we've got a bunch of ex-Envisioners, but we are doing some design leadership summits. There's one in New York, and then another one in San Francisco. The space is fairly limited on these because we're still trying this stuff out. But if you're interested in a leader in design, product, or engineering that works with design systems in your space, please apply. Come check it out. We've got 2 really incredible event venues. We're really excited to be talking about this, be working with our design communities in various cities. And then we're also doing this for practitioners in the form of local meetups. We finally have our first one of those squared away. Finding event space in folks' offices is way more challenging than it was 3 years ago. So we're going to be in Seattle on, it looks like February 29th. That's 98% confirmed. I don't have an event page to point everybody at yet for that. But I'm really excited to start to do these local events as well, with the first being end of February in Seattle.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I definitely encourage everybody to go. Like, meetups are great. I mean, I really miss those, especially design system meetups when I was, in Silicon Valley. But yeah, maybe we should organize one in the Denver area together. So
I'm in.
More on that later. Why not? Cool. Thanks for sharing all of that, Chris. And maybe now we can move on to the next or the main section of our talk today. And Kevin, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, I suppose the title is Naming Things is Hard. Gina, Ann, and Design Systems, that Slack channel, which has been a great resource, has a complete channel for naming things is hard. And as I look back on everything that I've talked about and written about for years, that really is kind of the thing that I've been trying to figure out. Why is this hard? And it really kind of comes down to, we all have these frustrations, and we create these systems. These are systems. And then we get to that 90% spot. And if you're a programmer, if you got 90%, it's only 50% done. That last 10% is going to do the last 50%. So at that last 10%, we sort of feel that something isn't working completely correctly. And if I could just continue on that, another analogy right now is that, as I'm working with design systems, and I was an iOS programmer, I was a designer, a photo retoucher, so I've got sort of that mixed background, where I'm just trying to make all these connections and trying to make it into something, holistic. Is that, and it really kind of comes down to exactly this thing. It's like, why wouldn't we pick up material design? We just pop that over. Should work, right? Except we don't. Or IBM or Adobe or anyone else, but we don't. And so there is a UX practice called the 5 Whys, and it is really stressful to actually practice that and actually be a part of that. Where let's say you're on a production line, and you have a rope above you. Every single person in there has the ability to pull the rope and stop the production line. And you do that. And then the managers and the supervisors come in and they say, why, until they figure it out. Then they say, oh, okay, well, this thing doesn't fit here. But anyway, the idea is that it goes all the way back down to, let's find the core reason. So when it comes down to naming conventions, we are inventing our own naming conventions over and over and over again because we didn't ask those 5 whys. That is really kind of where I'm at. And maybe if I can share screen, I could probably show a very simple example, maybe just to sort of start a conversation. Let's give that a whirl. So I've been mostly concentrating on colors in tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3s. And let's get down to, I've got like everything I've ever written up here. Don't I?
Kevin's pretty prolific on Medium, so it's worth taking a peek at. There's a lot of good stuff there.
So you know what it really is? It is the media. Yeah, this is the one. Why naming tokens is hard. And this goes, and I love the connection between programming and design within design systems. And this is Phil Carlton. There were only 2 hard things in computer science: cache and validation, and naming things, which is hilarious. And it's so true. And I could, probably talk about, the cultural significance of calling something a soda and a pop and a Coke, and how you could have a very different experience about that request. But, just to really kind of, get into a really quick start, if I were to do a survey and I were to say to someone, hey, listen, there's a name of a token called Palette Gray 1. Which of these hex codes best describes this name? And maybe I stand back a bit and I actually ask everyone here, Catherine, everyone else, which one would you choose, A, B, or C? Palette Gray 1.
I guess the F8 is lighter than F1, but it depends on the context. Like, what is the scale? What am I? Exactly. It doesn't matter without the other colors, right?
So only because it said there is no number 0, I picked C.
Exactly. Yep.
I was like, oh no, it's an off by 1 error in my color palette.
Oh no.
So I mean, and the thing is that, if and of course, and that's a wonderful point. It's in context. Do I see a 0? Well, then I could probably, infer that the 1 being the lowest number in context, it has to be this. But what I've seen and absolutely in production is, if they weren't looking at that context, they'll actually choose the A. This is production. This is programming. So this name right here is probably could be improved, and of course you have to go into those whys. So for instance, well, this is a palette. Okay, well, I think I know what a palette is, and it's gray, which is a noun. It describes exactly a color, and then the 1 is the quote unquote state or weight of that. And so the exercise becomes like, well, how could we improve that name? And it's like, well, Palette Gray 0. Well, how about that? Maybe that actually works out pretty much better. But does gray really intuitively associate with the concept of white? Is white gray? And I think the answer is no. And here would be like the solution here is that don't use a noun, use a verb, describe its quality rather than what it is, and that goes to blues and oranges and I I lots of things about why those are not the right way to actually define your palettes. But this, if I were to put this out there into a survey, I think we would find that palette neutral 0, you would have a very high correlation of C as being exactly the right answer, and no confusion between engineering and design.
It's an interesting look at something really simple.
Yeah, and the thing is that I feel it's so simple. And it's like, well, why would you even invest time in this? Is that I feel like if I were to take in material or IBM or what have you, is that I'm trying to climb a mountain. We're all trying to climb a mountain. But if that carabiner that I put in there is built by, material design and it fails, I'm still trying to climb the mountain. So it seems to me that carabiner that fails that I've felt, and I think a lot of us have maybe, is we need to make our own carabiner. We need to agree that this is a good carabiner. This is a good name for a token that allows us to get to the next level, and that's just a tier 1 token. The tier 2s and the tier 3s are that's been a very interesting thing. And so anyway, any feedback or thoughts on that very simple concept?
No, it's fascinating that you talk about it that way, right? Because I think that it does a good job of intertwining it to cultural context. If you're a designer and you don't commonly think about off by 1 errors, then you're like, yeah, all right, this answer seems obvious. If you're approaching it from an engineering perspective, like I was an engineer, my immediate thought is like, oh, well, clearly you need a 0. And likewise, like my context also for the mountain climbing, metaphor is interesting because, like, I have very particular brands of carabiners I use for mountaineering. And so it is an interesting kind of look at how cultural context influences our decision making around these sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
Soda and pop, creek and crick, syrup and syrup, pecan, all these things, like, it says a lot about who you are.
It does, and it informs your experience. For instance, I was raised in Texas, so I would go up to a drive-through and I would say, I want a Coke. Here's what I would hear. What kind of Coke?
Right.
And I would say Dr. Pepper every time. I love Dr. Pepper, but I'm here in Connecticut. I'm near New Haven. I'm in New Haven. And I would say, I want a Coke. And then I went, whoa. They don't understand that. They will never ask me what kind of Coke. They'll just give me a Coke. So yeah, it's culture and it's language. And it's that to me is really the focus point of creating that global design system. And I'd hope that all of us and Brad Frost and everybody else could come together at Snowbird Lodge, just like Agile did, and actually focus on that, agree on that, and then that's the carabiner we can rely on, move to the next level.
I mean, I'm down to go to Snowbird.
Would that be great?
Say the word.
It makes me think of something that you might or might not know about me is that I actually have a master's in philosophy. So language has been definitely something that I had some thought at some point anyway. And like the first thing that comes to mind for me is like the allegory of Babel, right? It's like it's all about like language is convention. And if you don't have that convention, it's impossible for us to build anything, and especially not something great. But yeah, I mean, and also I'm French, so you are talking about like English is not my first language. The context is very vastly different. So like like things that is maybe like one of the convention, for example, that I'm battling constantly is acronyms, because like it might make sense for you, but not for me. It's like it's just like, okay, cool, you're doing an LSC, what that is, and I cannot tell you the number of time where I'm Googling acronyms, either like internally in the company that I work for, or I just Google it. I'm like, what do you mean? It's like so anyway, I guess
The
my point
irony is that the French have acronyms in everything.
oh, yeah.
Um,
Of course, have you seen French? It's like super long all the time. So yeah. But anyway, so my point is that I hear you, and maybe to relate back to more of a design system specific anecdote that I can share is that when I was working for Intuit, and we were starting to think about how we wanted to architect or design token specifically, we actually did exactly that. We put together, engineers and designers, but especially specifically for engineers, like one for web, one for iOS, one for Android, and basically started to talk about how we wanted to name things, because everybody had a different context, and that certain words were reserved for a very specific situation in that language. And it was obviously very tedious and very slow. And some people, like leadership at some point were asking us, hey, can we like make that any faster? And I'm like, don't think so. Like, we really need to like talk about obviously, as we were progressing, we were starting to make more like convention between us and reusing certain convention in like another context, because as you said, like if white is 0 or white is 1, then like you're going to reuse that convention somewhere else. But it's very slow and tedious and painful to actually have humans align, and especially if they're coming from different backgrounds, different contexts, and different mental model, for sure.
Every time.
Yeah, totally. At DoorDash, we had a very similar challenge, especially across those different platforms, as you mentioned. I think for us, one of the things that we focused on was, all these different developers, designers coming from these different platforms, these different contexts, they're going to have their conventions. And while, having one shared name for what a date picker should be across all those languages seems like something that is worth standardizing around. I think being willing to say that, hey, there is some translation layer between these two spaces that helps each of these groups be able to work efficiently in iOS, and say, I don't necessarily need to force this group that has a strong shared convention in their broader community be using the specific language that I have just for my particular design system just in DoorDash. I think that was a fight we were willing to let go of, because I think greater challenges of like collaboration and alignment in like these bigger sort of organizations is that what is functionally a date picker and what are the capabilities of a date picker. That's where the real like sort of flashpoints are. But the name, like, whatever, we'll call it something on iOS that is slightly different than what we call it on web. That's totally fine. And I think like the idea of naming is hard is the kind of surface level iceberg of the idea that aligning and collaborating on what is a shared resource and the definition of a shared resource across these organizations and pieces of organization. That's really like what it kind of is just a small representation of.
Interestingly, I also feel like everything that has to do with, like naming and language, ultimately, first of all, is about cultural change. And that also means that it actually touches something about influence, authority, like who is actually leading that like whatever convention is. It's like creating a new expression, right? It's like every day people come up with like new expression that might or might not stick right in their context with that group of people.
Right.
That is super interesting, right? It's like if you have like a new, I mean, I remember, like components, I think it was at Intuit, but there was a component that was called trousers. And so like somebody came up with this and some people actually agreed and like, oh, yeah, sounds cool. Like I get it, like I will reuse it myself. And so like,
that reminds me of Dan Mall. He posted this on LinkedIn. I literally copied and pasted it. It says it doesn't matter what you name the component. It's just that everyone agrees with it. That's the most important thing. And that component name was Fred, not trousers. And I think he's since walked.
Just cringe.
I
never would let that happen in my DS.
I would never let that happen. I wrote an article saying why Fred is a terrible name for a component. And then some people, I think Dan Mall walked back on that later, but no, that he totally said that. And yeah, it's a thing. That's a big challenge. That's actually even above where I'm concentrating, which is tier 1, tier 2s, and tier 3s.
What do you mean by tier 2 and 3s? Just where you can all agree on what
right. Yeah, exactly. Let's agree on that. So the tier 1 tokens are your palette colors, let's say. Your tier 2 tokens inherit from tier 1 tokens, and they were responsible for dark modes and light modes. They're the tier 2 tokens, let's just agree between all of us, is that they don't have a noun. There is no noun in a tier 2 token. But when you actually put a noun in there, this is a button. This is a switch. That's a tier 3. And now it becomes a very interesting question about where do you present that for your designers and your engineers? What do you hide? So that's, oh God, that's another one.
By the way, I don't know if you know, but Dan is actually listening to us, so be careful now.
Oh, Dan, hi.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. And yeah, I mean, ultimately, I just like I'm just, I guess, stuck on this idea of like whatever, like it could literally be, like every component in your system could be called like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, like at the end of the spectrum. That is possible, right? And so, but first of all, like it's all about like, again, who has the authority or the leadership or like the I don't know how to find, actually, obviously that's very ironic, but I'm looking for a good word here, but has the gravity so that like whatever they say goes.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing. But then apart from that, there's also the fact that probably a good name is easy to understand and what we're talking about, right? And so this is part of like what this is art, but ultimately like it's all about like if somebody that has the authority or is a thought leader, considered a thought leader in that group, it's going to be easier for them to actually come up with a name that
absolutely. And like those the palette gray 0, what, that works perfectly well for Salesforce. They're culturally acclimatized to that. They will learn that. It's just that it doesn't translate out. Here's the greatest quote I ever saw on that, is that he was an engineering architect, and he said his professor said, hey, listen, you could call a chair a horse, but don't be disappointed that nobody doesn't understand you. So, Dan, sorry, I love you, Dan. So Fred might be the chair that is actually a horse. On the other hand, just what Christoph was saying is that culture is going to actually inform that culture and the communication structure, who's in charge of what. Fred's going to work perfectly well, just as that chair and the horse. Anyway, there you go.
Yeah, it's interesting too, right? Because like a lot of this is a fight over a squishy middle, and I think that English provides an interesting problem in and of itself here, right? Because it's like 300-400 million native English speakers, but then like almost 3 times that as people that speak English as a second language. And in opposition to like Japanese, where there's like 100 million people that speak Japanese, and like nobody that's not Japanese speaks Japanese as a second language. And so, you know, you're coming from this common cultural context. And I mean, that's not to say there's not like subcultures within Japan, because there absolutely is. But like there is a common understanding of a lot of what words mean. Whereas in English, like one of the things I always used to joke, we used to host a lot of students that were learning English at my house, is the best part about English is that you can speak it really badly and people will still understand you. And so I think that one of the interesting things that we're saying here is it's less about like Fred or chair or horse. It's more about like, how precise do we want to be about this, right? So we can have a color token name that is, you know, thousands of characters long, that is a very, very specific description of that color. But nobody's going to use that because, first of all, an engineer is never going to type that. And then secondly, like the idea of like how much signal do we actually need to create that form of understanding? That's what we're really trying to figure out, right? Is like, how do I create this common concept, this common intention between people using the shortest possible way of saying it? Because if we talk about like red, for example, as like in the context of other reds and in the context of what red means for our palette in our name, now all of a sudden it's not a name, it's a description. And so trying to figure out like how we can choose the precision of our words without overloading it, and also without missing intention because of like hubris or pomp or whatever, right? And using words people don't understand. I think that's where the balance is in my mind, right? It's less about like this thing means something completely different than this other thing, and a lot more about like, hey, you know, if you say it this way, it nudges the meaning a little bit this way or a little bit that way, and we can't afford to put all the words we need in this name to say exactly what we need.
And even if you did, you know, have that explicit description, your token names would explode into thousands.
Right. And I think that there's an argument for precision, but a cost to precision. And that's what we're trying to balance. I think that nobody wants to read Infinite Jest when they're trying to determine what color to use for their main font on a web page. But we also can create confusion if we're not specific and direct about what that name is.
It's a challenge.
Yeah. Okay. I just like conscious of the people that might listening to us and say, yeah, okay, so we get it. Like, this is so hard. I want to maybe like offer some ideas or hope that, you know, you can actually come up with some solutions. So who here has maybe some tips or, you know, like things that worked for you in your context to actually get some results, right? Kevin, do you want to start? What works for you?
You know, yeah. And here's it's a terrible thing because at that point you have to be extraordinarily opinionated, and we don't like doing that. And yet without that, you can't have a framework. You can't have a game design. That's really kind of where I'm going, is I want to give some very simple rules to a very, very large amount of different disciplines, and they go, aha, I can play this game successfully. So let's say for the tier 1, the primitives, the palette, I would say that we want to have a semantic name: primary, secondary, tertiary, info, system, neutral, and more. And so we're actually sort of forming our opinion of the design system in the very, very base layer. So therefore, the blues, the greens, the fuchsias, the violets, that is simply a value. It's not. In other words, if I say blue, green, violet, that's a noun. I've already nouned it, and becomes very, very difficult to actually swap into a different brand. Rather, consider, putting your intention into your palette. The second part is the tier 2 tokens, which is responsible for dark mode and light mode. So they inherit not one but two tokens to say how do I present when someone says dark mode. Here's the crazy thing that I found, and this is a thought experiment with an article I wrote for what if Andy Warhol made tokens in Figma?
This is
As
this
one
is a good
does.
one.
Intriguing.
So this is the article. In fact, you could just hear this. You don't have to read the article. Please read the article, but you don't have to. Andy Warhol he's in 1960. He transports himself to 2024. He loves interacting with a computer or an iPhone or what have you. But he has to come back to 1960, and he says, "I want to have this experience for my people, for my the people who buy my artwork. How do I do that? I've only got canvas. I've got paper. I've got ink. I've got paint. I've got all of these things." So imagine the digital experience as an expression of a collection of different materials and artwork, a collage, and it all of a sudden sort of made sense for me to use that analogy as I'm constructing things. But there's a strange thing on the tier 2 tokens. I'm liking this. So there's a concept in music where you would say, well, this is the normal volume that I would play this music, a piano. And then there's a piano. And then if I want to have it softer, I would use the Italian word of piano, or P as notated. Or if softer, I would say PP, or softer, PPP. And then louder, forte, forte, forte. So that actually allows me to actually define things, my canvas, my paper, my ink, in such a way where I have that flexibility to define and determine, how can I classify this and allow that freedom for the designer to create the expression that they want. That was a lot. I am so sorry, but that to me was something I popped together about 2 weeks ago, and I'm still really, really digging it.
Well, I know what you mean. I went I did ceramics painting with my kids for the first time ever. It was a great family bonding experience, right? And what was really fascinating is they have all these, you buy a piece of ceramic that's prefabbed and then you paint it in a studio. And one of the really cool things they have is they have a wall of ceramic tiles that's nothing but the colors that you can use from the different paint jars. And then what it also has is how many coats you apply and how vibrant that color is expressed based on the number of coats you apply. And I looked at that and I was like, my wife, Michelle, she's always she always professes to not totally understand what I do. I was like, see that? That's what I do.
Right there.
And I was like, but applied to the internet more broadly. And she's like, oh, okay. But that's kind of what I was hearing when you were talking about that. And the other thing that I was hearing that came to mind is grounding in a lot of these ideas of design. I tend to be a hater when it comes to the idea of hey, we all went from pen and paper and artboards and easels and posters to trying to make posters on the internet, right? I am infuriated often by a lot of the slow adoption or the dragging back into the prior ideas of print design that we had to borrow from to really understand how to build for the web. But at the same time, there are still fundamentals there that are really interesting that if you harken back to in the right context, help with things like naming, because you can start to understand how we use these systems in our physical space and start to use that set of tooling to that mental model to define them in the digital space as well.
I agree. It's really been helpful for me, and it's so new to me right now, but I just feel free to create things, not only in dark mode and light mode, instantaneously. So it still needs a lot of gameplay testing to make sure I didn't miss anything. I'm really hoping we can find a forum that everybody could, say, you missed that, Kevin. What about this, Kevin? Or and even even my own team at Dow Jones, I would love to get everyone together to sort of do that initial play testing. So
one of the things that I think is interesting about that too is I think it was Brad. I think it was Brad that posted something earlier this week about descriptions of components. And I posted some funny thing about like some of the descriptions that are used in our own design system. Because I think that like there's lots of descriptions that end up being meaningless, but there are important ways of tackling naming with that dichotomy of like base name and description. And the idea is like, look, we need to get close when we're deciding a base name to describing what that thing is, or like maybe not even describing it, but creating alignment between people about what that thing is. But then there's probably one level deeper, which is like, what is that description and how does that meaningful description serve to clarify things, right? And it's almost like a pseudo legal process, and maybe this is just because I'm a business owner, I deal with contracts all the time, but like nobody actually really wants to read the legalese, but the legalese is really helpful when there's a disagreement about what the things that you're saying or the things that are broadly written in bullet points actually mean. And so it's not that we all have to necessarily be lawyers, but there is a value to this two-tiered idea, right? You have the name of the thing, and then you have that long form description of that thing. And when the name of the thing doesn't suffice, or when there's confusion about the name of the thing, that long form description is what is intended to help clear that up. Even in something as simple and stupid as like a button is there for to denote a user action in a place that they can click on a page, yada, yada.
I was actually thinking about something else, but when you teach, especially when you teach kids, your kids how to talk, one of the key things, and I think we're actually also applying that in design system, is that you also actually associate the word with an image. And so, like basically teaching people like, yeah, I get it. Like, obviously I'm not saying that we're teaching people like design system users how to talk, but in our context, maybe we need to show them a picture of a Fred or a horse or a chair or or a trouser, right? To just say,
what does Fred look like? That's my like immediate like. Yeah, I love it. You're totally right, Chris.
It's a carousel. It's a carousel.
Yes,
yeah,
clearly.
But you see my point, right? Like between like the name and the long form description, there might be like a just an help that could be just a visual, right? Like just an image of what you're talking about might be enough to say, okay, that's that, right? And this is also why for discoverability probably of your component library, it's such a good idea also to have some kind of gallery that is going to show a visual and a name. And so what you're really doing here is teaching people how to speak your design system language. And so that is another part that might actually help getting traction around like your naming convention, whatever it is. At some point, you need to teach people that, yeah, this is what it is. Some people, at some point made a decision that needs to be communicated to the masses. And that might be a tool for you to get there. And obviously being consistent and not starting to talk, to have like the same word in like different meanings or like having the same image with like different names, like that is actually super confusing. But yeah, and maybe it's because again I'm French and we have words that have so many different meanings depending on the context that I'm particularly keen on that aspect. But I think it's important also for us to communicate those decisions too. Anyway,
I love that.
Cool. Well, we're almost at time. I just want to, thank you, Kevin, for coming today and talk about naming. It was a very fun discussion. And obviously, Catherine and Chris, thanks again for hosting with me and participating in all those conversations. Any final words?
Fun. That was great. Yeah. What a great day.
Naming is fun.
Yeah.
That's right. That's what we should. I love that rebrand, that like reframing of naming. Like naming things is not hard. It's fun.
It's fun. Yeah.
Type 2 fun.
Okay. Well, have fun, everybody. And until next time,
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.